All right. Hi, everyone. It's 5:30. We'll get started. I'm Naomi Rosenberg. I'm on faculty in the emergency department and also the enthusiastic new director for the narrative medicine program here. Thank you. It's good to be with everyone tonight. And I wanted to welcome you to our 10th annual, our 10th Story Slam here at the School of Medicine. Just by way of talking about sharing stories, I've been so moved recently by this quote I read by James Baldwin that was published in 1963, and he said, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was Dostoevsky and Dickens who taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all people who were alive or who had ever been alive." And so when we think about what it does to share our stories, I think a lot of us think about lessening isolation and certainly for those of us in medicine, which is most of us here, we think about remembering our shared purpose of what we do every day when we take care of patients and their families. I also think that for those of us who are doctors, we ask our patients to get naked in front of us, literally and figuratively, and to share themselves with us. And I think when we are willing to remember the vulnerability in sharing our own stories, it improves our ability to do that and to be with them. We are happy to be running the Story Slam here this year. For the students in the room, if sharing a story in front of an audience isn't your thing, we have our first narrative medicine workshop coming up this Monday, October 17th from noon to 1. So please join us. It's open to all classes. And for everyone across the health system, we'll be starting our speaker series next month, the Life in Medicine series, where we'll interview a senior faculty member about their life in medicine, things they've learned, mistakes they've made. And everyone will, of course, be invited to that. We have, like I said, this is our 10th Story Slam. I'm going to hand it over to Mike, who has spearheaded this every year for us here at the School of Medicine, inspiring events both across the city at each institution and the citywide Story Slam that happens in the spring. So I feel fortunate to be part of Temple, who was really at the start of the narrative medicine and medical humanities programming in this way in the area, and I hope you guys enjoy tonight. I'll hand it over to Mike.
You guys, I have to say I'm very excited about Naomi running the narrative medicine program, and you guys can see why. Thank you, Naomi. All right. Thank you guys for coming. It's the 10th Story Slam. I think we started in 2016 or 2017. We endured the pandemic. So we really decided to do it in person this year because I think it's best for the storytellers to have an audience. You all can see that we have Dan Burke here videoing it, and so it's going to be going worldwide in a couple weeks. And so, but for tonight, I want to thank the storytellers for being brave and getting up here and sharing your stories, and I want to thank you guys here for coming. Good news is the Phillies, if you're a fan, won't start till 7:30 or 8 o'clock because it's raining in Atlanta, so that's good. Our motto here is that when people in medicine gather to tell stories, everyone is lifted. I think we have a great lineup of storytellers tonight. Just going to get to the rules really fast and we'll go. The storytellers get 5 minutes to tell a story. We have a little clock down here they can see. We don't give them the hook, but when the 5 minutes is up, they know they should begin to be winding it up. So the stories will all run around 5 or 6 minutes. The theme is advice. You can interpret it as loosely as they want. So I want to stress this is a celebration of stories, not a competition. But you, the audience, at the end of the night, will pick the winner, and you will get to vote. So I hope you'll stay to the bitter end, and it won't be bitter, it'll be a beautiful end, and vote. And the winner will go on, or actually 2 winners, well, first and second, will go on to represent Temple at the citywide Story Slam at the College of Physicians against, we now have Story Slams at Drexel and Penn and Jeff and Cooper and BCom, and we all then, 2 winners of all those gather, we have a citywide one, and it's really been a wonderful experience. All right, I think that is all the news I need to give you, and I say let's get on with the show. going first, it's always hardest to go first, so I thank her so much, is Dr. Roshi Mosabe, who is a attending neonatologist in the NICU, and her story is going to be advice to a younger me. Dr. Mosabe, come on up. All right.
The story is called Advice to a Younger Me. What advice would you give to your younger self? This is a question posed on a Disney Plus show called High School Musical, the Musical Disney. It's a show that my younger self would not have watched because she was just too cool. But I'm being forced by my 11-year-old daughter to watch a new episode every night that I'm not working the night shift in the NICU. What makes it really painful is that she stops the show if we are interrupted by a phone call, text message, email, or any kind of interruption. Then she rewinds, recaps, and we have to sit through the painful episode again. Sorry, Ella. So don't tell her I said so. So I decided to derive some meaning from this terrible show. I'm going to give advice to my younger self, the intern who is about to embark on residency, and to all of you. Talk less. Smile more. Don't let them know what you're against or what you're for. Sorry, this is a line from Hamilton, my favorite musical. Okay, here it goes. In alphabetical order, my advice. A for advice. Don't give unsolicited advice like I'm doing here. B for breathe. Just breathe. Whenever faced with a difficult situation, take a couple of deep breaths. It slows down your anxious thoughts. It slows down your nervous system. I do it every time when I go into a difficult delivery, especially when we are expecting extreme preterm babies being delivered. C for calm down. Just be. Enjoy the rare moments where you're standing still, either standing in line at the coffee shop or stopped at the stop sign. And C for compassion. Have compassion for others and for yourself. Be kinder to yourself when you're faced with difficult situations. D for drink. More water. Keep hydrated. Protect your kidneys and take bathroom breaks. E for eat. Eat good food and eat in company of your other co-residents. And when you're doing that, check in with them and see how everybody's doing. F for failure, okay? It teaches you resiliency, and it's going to teach you things you didn't know about yourself. Don't let those failed tests define you. And F for forgiveness. Practice forgiveness towards others and yourself, because not forgiving leads to a huge emotional baggage that will wear you down. G for guilt. Don't feel guilty when you're feeling sad, tired, or frustrated. You are just human, okay? So you forgot your mother's birthday. It happens. H for heart. Cultivate strong social connections with your friends, family, and colleagues. In other words, do not forget your mother's birthday. H for inspiration. Even difficult situations can inspire you to see the possibility for a positive change. And I for inspiration. I for I am possible. Keep reminding yourself that anything you put your mind to is possible. J for joy. Keep enjoying the simple pleasures like the smell of freshly brewed coffee at the end of your night shift. K for keep your friends close and find common grounds with your enemies. L. L is for the way you look at me. O is for the only one I see. So you get the gist. Love. Just love. Love your life. Love your friends. Love your family. Love what you do. If you love what you do, it's not going to lead to burnout. Seriously, love what you do. M is for mensch. Be a mensch. Be a person of integrity, morality, and dignity. N is for nobody. Nobody is perfect. O for Oscars. Have a red carpet moment every once in a while. I know scrubs are comfortable, but put on your high heels, put on your nice suits, you guys, and really appreciate your outer beauty. P for pride. Take pride in the family and friends that helped raise you, and the schools and institutions that help you be who you are. Q for quiet. Sit quietly every day for a few minutes and really reflect on what happened on that day. R for rich. Lead a rich life that is filled with music, love, humor, and laughter. S for silly. Be silly every once in a while. Have a good laugh and don't take yourself too seriously. T for tenacity. Remember how determined you had to be to get to where you are today. There's still lots more you guys want to achieve. U for unique. You have a unique set of skills, talents, and goals. The great things that make you, you. V for victory. Celebrate the little victories, however small they may be, like the first time you successfully completed a procedure. W for watch. Watch your progress and make sure you're still staying true to yourself. Progress over perfection. X for Xanadu, which is an idyllic, exotic, luxurious place. For me, it's my grandparents' home in Tehran. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in Xanadu whenever life gets too hard. Y is for you. You are unique, you are strong, you are enough. Z for zest. Have zest for life and try new things, like sharing on StorySlam. So maybe this show, after all, that my daughter Ella forces me to watch had some value after all. And it does have really great choreographed singing and dancing, so you might want to give it a shot. I hope that you will find my advice helpful and use it PRN or as needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Masalad, and I wish I could sing or dance. Oh, actually, I'm terrible. I'm glad you did that. That's great. Thank you for sharing. Enjoy the show tonight. Maybe you'll get home in time to watch. Next up, we have Jean Lee from Doctor of Nephrology, and her theme tonight, our story is titled The Good Doctor.
When I write these stories, I always feel a little guilty because I'm actually talking about people. I don't know what they think about this. So actually this year I took the precaution of actually asking the woman who actually gave the advice her permission, and she was tickled and I was like happy about it. So I am not violating HIPAA, I am not doing anything. Everyone who's involved in the story knows they're in it, okay? And the story is called The Good Doctor. So every year in October, the National Kidney Foundation holds a walk to raise awareness of kidney disease. My outpatient dialysis unit always has a team of patients and staff. On one such walk 10 years ago, I went down to the art museum to join the team. There was a group of patients with their blue Dialysis Clinic Incorporated t-shirts. Actually, that's my heart, okay? And they were sitting on Eakins Oval. It was a beautiful, crisp October day. They waved and I walked over to them. One said to me, "Listen, I have to talk to you about the new doctor." That past July, we had a new doctor join us in the unit. He was up on the science. He would spend hours in the unit, counseling patients, teaching the fellows. He was a master of the electronic medical record system, much better than me, and his patient satisfaction scores were excellent. The nurses loved him at times. The patients loved him always. But the other doctors, not so much. He was too perfect. He was too perfect. He never rushed with patients. He always knew more. He explained it better than the rest of us. His lectures were meticulously crafted, and he worked to a higher standard, and it made us very uneasy. It was very hard to be his friend. And despite all this, Mrs. A was worried. That boy is going to give himself a heart attack. He gets so upset when we don't do well, when he thinks he doesn't do well, or when he thinks the staff doesn't do well? Can you tell him we are not as good as he wants us to be, but we're not as bad as he thinks we are? We in healthcare, we deal with human lives. We need to be careful and as perfect as possible. So to get into medical school, we select the people we think will be the smartest, the most caring, the most knowledgeable. They're the best test takers and the hardest workers. The assumption is, if you study your material, if you ace your test, if you perform well on your clerkships, the future will be boundless and you will cure disease. You and those you treat will be healthy and hopefully immortal. But the world is a harder place. You can't remember everything, or you may be incorrect. The science is flawed. You can do everything right, and yet it all goes horribly wrong. You work with others, staff and patients. They don't always agree with you. They may not even like you. Sometimes you are right, and sometimes they are. And in the end, everybody dies, and everything goes away. So time passes. The good doctor was offered the directorship of a university program elsewhere. He moved. The pandemic occurred. I think of him, and the patients ask about him. They miss him. The nurses miss him. I miss him. The nurse educator sent him a Christmas email and was excited to get a response. Quote, "Becoming director of the division certainly seemed like an exciting opportunity to help patients, but the job turned out to be the largest disappointment of my professional life. When my parents showed signs of needing some extra help around the house, a move made sense. So I suppose I joined with the big quit. The bottom line is, I just wanted to make a difference and help patients and help teach people who want to take care of patients." I think these words summarize all that we wish to do as doctors, although many times life gets in the way. I hope the good doctor finds his way to a more fulfilling life in medicine. I never passed on Mrs. A's words of wisdom to him. I was afraid how he would take it. I wonder what would have happened if I did. Would he have been receptive? Would it have made a difference? But in my career, I have learned that we are all more fragile than we appear. And we are also all too hard on ourselves. I've been thinking about Mrs. A's advice a lot lately. We are not as good as we want to be, but we are not as bad as we think we are. Life is for the long haul, and it has a way of correcting itself, so relax. And in closing, my advice to you is on a bright October day, go out and take a walk with your friends and be kind to yourself. It may be the best medicine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you, Dr. Lee. I hope that doctor finds a beautiful future, and thanks for all you do here. I think Dr. Lee has presented 4 or 5 story slams. So.
You're my psychotherapy.
Oh, great. Okay, we're psychotherapy. Well, that's dangerous if I am. Okay, third up, last year's champion. Just had to add that. The wonderful M2, future Dr. Nia Williams, and her story is Mr. Clark.
Last spring, at the tail end of my very first year of medical school, I found myself in the emergency department. I was there to shadow the evening shift as part of my Introduction to Narrative Medicine course. I've been tasked with interviewing a patient and writing a narrative about our conversation. Beneath the surface of those instructions was my true assignment, to unearth the quiet nuances and details that shape the identity and lived experience of this human being that I probably never find in their history of present illness. Needless to say, I was incredibly nervous. I arrived early in blue scrubs and sneakers with my stethoscope and face shield, trying to look 1,000 times less rattled than I felt, and cautiously approached the main workstation and was aptly called the red zone due to the intensity and urgency of the cases seen. I must have had the maybe she's been here before but has no idea what she's doing face, because the nurse promptly approached me and said, "Hey hon, what can I do for you?" I explained I was there to shadow one of the attendings and was soon settled in among the other trainees. The attending allowed me to go off with the residents while he figured out which patient I could talk to and write about. Even though there was a stroke alert and a few trauma cases happening, the attending arranged for me to meet one of the sweetest patients he'd had the pleasure of caring for. Smiling, I grabbed my notebook and pen and followed his lead into the patient's room, silently hoping I wouldn't say anything stupid. The attending introduced me to Mr. Clark, a bright and bubbly 92-year-old black man who I honestly wouldn't have otherwise known was sick just by looking at him. After we were left alone, I sat in a chair near his bed, introduced myself, and explained why I wanted to talk with him. He listened intently with a mischievous glint in his eye and said, "You're just as pretty as ever. You have made my day." We both laughed, and it set the tone for a conversation I won't soon forget. He told me how he was born and raised in North Carolina in the 1930s, and how he made a life for himself after his mother passed away when he was only 17 years old. He excitedly described his time as a shoe shine boy. "We used to shoe shine for 10 cents and I get a whole dollar tip." He also maintained local fields by plowing, picking corn and cotton, and caring for mules. Since he missed too many days from school because of work, he was only able to receive a 6th grade education. He later married his wife of 71 years, who he speaks fondly of, but also wistfully, as she's living with Alzheimer's and doesn't remember much anymore. There's a moment he looks away with a smile, as if she's right there in the room with us, and says, "She ain't know what she was getting into when she married me." He doesn't forget to tell me about their 7 children and loads of grandkids who shower him with affection, attention, and love. Mr. Clark shares a few more memories with his family before he asks about mine. "Are you married? As smart as you are, I'm sure somebody done snatched you up." I laugh and respond with, "No sir, I'm not." He feigns great shock and laughs before he leaves me with a piece of advice. In your life, your future marriage, and all that you do, always try to make it your best. I've long imagined the trip I'm now taking as the first person in my family to go into medicine. Along the way and among the many lessons I learned, the Mr. Clarks of my own family had messages of both encouragement and warning. By the time college arrived, I stuffed myself with orgos, statistics, physics, late nights, blood, sweat, tears, and maybe even a little fear, but a hope. A hope so strong that I dared to think I'd not only make it here, but carry my whole community on my back too. I wanted to do it perfectly. So when I started medical school, I unconsciously burdened myself with this pressure to be perfect. For myself, for my community, for my patients, for everyone, heightened by my identity and background. Yet in the few fleeting moments I spent with this elder black man, who shared a similar Southern background to that of my grandmother, the charm and humor of my uncles, the quiet vulnerability and wisdom of my mother, I received the space and permission to exhale. From that day forward, I've committed not to robotic perfection, but to whatever my best is in the moment. So when life has gotten hectic and I face unexpected realities, being in bed for a week with COVID, failing a midterm, dropping the ball with my leadership commitments, missing special occasions with loved ones, I recite this affirmation to myself over and over again. In my life, in all that I do, I try to make it my best. Thank you.
The future Dr. Williams, thank you. Your best in the moment was terrific right here. Thank you for that story. Is Rose Baer, Dr. Baer, you here? She's here. All right. Came straight from the ICU or somewhere, right? You work with doctors. Okay, next up is Rose Baer. Dr. Bear is a third-year resident pediatric in St. Chris, and her story is lessons from my grandparents.
Thanks, Temple, for welcoming the St. Chris fam. So, lessons from my grandparents. Fresh out of his surgical residency, my grandfather, Melvin Horwitz, known to us as Papa, served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. Without any prior experience in the field, he was assigned to a mobile Army surgical hospital, or a MASH unit. As my grandmother Dorothy put it, nothing in all his stateside training had prepared him for the shock of operating on the wounded in war. He once wrote to my grandmother, "Another patient's heart stopped. I picked up a scalpel, incised his chest, spread his ribs open, with my hand pumped his heart for a few minutes until it started beating again." These words were only several of the millions that my grandparents exchanged via hundreds of letters that they wrote during their time apart at war. They shared everything with each other: their work, their fears, their hopes, loneliness, and love. They wrote, "We will not be strangers when we meet." At the end of the war, Mel was relocated to a U.S. hospital in Fukuoka, Japan, and there he reunited with Dorothy. While Mel spent his days operating, Dorothy tutored American soldiers, taught English to both Japanese students and professors at Fukuoka University. On the train one day, my grandmother met a 16-year-old boy who wanted to practice his English. They became dear friends, and years later, that boy became a vascular surgeon, Dr. Ono. His career path was influenced by the time he had spent with my papa. Another day, my grandmother was in search of a private bathtub, not common in Japan at that time. She befriended a neighbor who surreptitiously offered her a bath, which began a beautiful, lifelong friendship. Her name is Misako. When their years in Fukuoka ended and they returned to the U.S., my grandparents continued their tradition of letter writing and remained deeply connected to these friends, Dr. Ono and Misako, for the following 64 plus years. My grandfather continued operating in the small town of Manchester, Connecticut for over 30 years until his steady hands began to shake and he was later diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He passed away in 2015, and my grandmother, now 94, lives here in Philadelphia and still delights in written letters from her family and friends. Papa continued writing to me as well throughout his life until he passed away. Towards the end of his life, he would finish his letters with, "My hands are tired for now. I love you." After my first year of medical school ended in 2017, I flew to Japan. I toured Tokyo, Hakone, Kyoto with my best friend, and then I continued to Fukuoka on my own. I arrived there to warm, open, seemingly familiar arms of Misako. Though we had never met before, I could feel the 64 years of love and friendship in her hug. Misako brought me green tea in her traditional Japanese home and an album full of pictures that she had kept of my grandparents and our family over the 64 years. She saved all the photos, news, and birth announcements that my grandmother had sent her. As I turned the pages, my eyes filled with tears. My grandparents were so young, beautiful, and so visibly in love. I saw my grandfather in his uniform and my grandmother modeling a kimono. The following day, she took me to the house where my grandparents used to live. I felt as if I was walking in their footsteps, following their energy, their careers, their adventure, their youth, and their love. That night, we had a traditional 10-course Japanese meal with none other than Dr. Ono, the 16-year-old boy from the train, now a grandfather and a retired surgeon. He shared stories of my grandfather, and I listened happily and earnestly as I told him about my childhood with my grandparents. I shared with him the stories of my first year of medical school, the ones I wished I could share with my grandfather. His eyes glistened with joy and secondhand pride. Immediately upon returning from my vacation, I mailed Misako a letter thanking her for all she had shared with me, keeping alive the written tradition that held years of history, love, and friendship for my grandparents. Now, as I near the end of my own residency, I often reflect on my grandparents' history and the impact of war and love on my papa's medical career and his life. I think back on the times I wish I could have sought his wisdom and advice, or exchanged stories or patient cases or personal struggles throughout these intense years. How we both would have savored it. Though I didn't have these opportunities, I still carry pieces of his wisdom and advice with me. 1, do not be strangers with those you love, no matter how far away you are. And 2, always keep writing. Thank you.
A beautiful story. Thank you, Dr. Baer. We can feel your grandfather's spirit. Next up, we have one of our own here from the Narrative Medicine program. Dr. Rosenberg is going to share a story of hers. Don't rush, smile gently. All right.
When I was 4 years old, I started going with my dad to the hospital on Saturdays and Sundays. Going to work was a way for me to spend time with him on the weekends. He worked every day. On May 22nd, 1989, he and a team at the National Cancer Institute treated their first patient with gene transfer therapy. It was an experimental new treatment for cancer that has since cured hundreds of patients previously thought to have incurable metastatic disease. For as long as I can remember, he has had laser focus on making progress for those who are suffering. The treatments that didn't work haunted him. One Saturday night, we stood in line at our local video rental store. There was a teenager at the counter and he handed us our movie. Dr. Rosenberg, he started. If he knew my dad's name, I knew what was coming. You helped my mom when she was sick. Thank you for everything you tried to do for her. She said it so many times. You're a wonderful doctor. My dad would smile seriously at moments like that and somehow find something to say. Then he would sit patiently through whatever little kid movie I had chosen, but as soon as I was asleep, he'd race back to work, and first thing Sunday morning, we'd head back again, making sure we left extra early. When we got into his office, I would color or read while my dad worked, and as I got older, I graduated to waiting outside patients' rooms while he went in his white coat. I would peek in to see what it looked like to be dying. A man was eating a sandwich watching soccer on TV. In another room, a woman stood rearranging some flowers on a windowsill. They didn't look like they were dying, but I did not yet understand just how the dying live. As a teenager, sometimes he would start to usher me inside with him. We never brought official news, always just seemed to be stopping by, and he would offer encouragement. You're doing well, he would say. The cells are fighting the cancer. That cough is normal. Could you get up today for a short walk? Only many years later would I come to understand what it meant to have a doctor come in to see you on weekends when it was not his time on call. One day, as we went into the room of a young man in his 20s lying in bed with a parent lying there on each side, he turned to me. It's important for your patients to know that you're working hard. It's important for them to know that you are here and you are working. As we left, he saw my worry. One of the greatest challenges in medicine is bringing comfort to those in pain, no matter their situation. And then, when you walk into a patient's room, you never rush and you smile gently. If the plane was bumpy and the pilot came out of the cockpit looking worried, how would you feel? Roll the clock forward. I walked into the emergency department at Temple University Hospital on July 1st of 2013 for the first day of my intern year, and I was nauseous with fear. I've since walked in and out of patient rooms at all hours and on all days. Monday morning, Saturday nights, Christmas Eve, snowstorm, Super Bowl Sunday. It was one of the things that drew me to our specialty. We're always there. The door is never closed. One winter day, a man collapsed on a bus traveling to pick his daughter up from school. Quick imaging revealed blood from a ruptured aneurysm and increasing pressure building inside the contained space of his skull. The neurosurgeon tells me he will not survive. He says it is an unsurvivable event. I'm not brand new to this, but I'm not experienced either, and I wonder what to say when we go to see his mother, who we hear is in the family room. The senior neurosurgeon heads down the hallway to that family room. He ushers me inside with him, and he doesn't rush. He smiles gently and he sits down. Mrs. Booker, he says, I am so sorry, I have terrible news. He is calm and thoughtful and kind. He leaves enormous room for this woman in all of her grief. I think about what I learned as a child from my father and am filled with wonder at how differently I'm learning it now. I feel grateful for the blessing of good doctors. Roll the clock again, and it's early on the Sunday morning, February 2021, and my own children, twin boys, have just been born at 31 weeks. They're 15 hours old. For brief seconds, I saw them after delivery before a skilled neonatal team took each one to help him breathe. I am lying in an unfamiliar yet so familiar hospital bed, and the nurse comes in to take us upstairs to the NICU. Protocol dictated that I be pushed in a wheelchair and not walk. You're patient, they keep telling me. So the nurse and my husband push me through the NICU door, and immediately I hear the unique sound of a monitor announcing dangerously low oxygen levels, and I feel my heartbeat start to pulse in my ears. I could feel my eyes start to fill with tears as they may now. A man walked toward me slowly, but right away, he didn't rush. Congratulations, Mom, on Dr. Ritterman. Your sons are just down the hall. They had a good night. It's a long road ahead, but they're going to be just fine. We're all working hard to get them through this. Come, meet them. He smiles gently. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenberg. It's a beautiful story. As you can see, third child's on the way. All right, next we have Dr. Darylis Fleitas, who is a critical care fellow here. And thank you for joining us. And he is going to tell the story, The Sacred Connection. Dr. Fleitas.
I want to share 3 experiences that have shaped me as a doctor and helped me throughout my training. They really have grounded me. And they're all about learning how to practice medicine in a human way. And my first story, I was a second-year resident in Green Team, the first time I get to be the one who makes some decisions. And I had this really old Italian grandma, and she looked so much like my own grandma. She was a bit scared. I walked into her room, we were supposed to do a procedure, and she grabbed my hand, held it really tight as the procedure was being carried over. I asked her how come she was in New York City. As an immigrant, I wanted to know her story. She started to tell me her story, how when she was 17, she witnesses how American soldiers were partying in her city in Italy, how they were freeing Europe from fascists and Nazis. How she, 2 years later, had embarked in a transatlantic ship at 19 to reach New York City to meet one of those soldiers, one of those that had been in Italy 2 years ago. With her story, she shared with me a glimpse of that magic moment when good had defeated evil and they were celebrating in the streets, dancing, drinking, hugging, kissing. This is how she met her husband. I usually take care of patients that are extremely sick, and her story helps me to remember that behind the diagnosis there's a person. With her sharing so much in such a little time, she gave me a new perspective, and she helped me focus on how to impact positively on others. Our patients are human beings with feelings, with stories that we may or may not know, but we become part of their story. I had a rotation residency, was a CCU, so extremely hard rotation, terrifying. We have to be in the CCU from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., 7 days straight, no days off. And you're basically on your own. You have your fellow coming in from time to time to help, but these were your patients. And those patients will teach you so much as you were trying to just keep them alive. I admitted an elderly woman, she had heart failure, she had a pacemaker, and she was going in and out of VTAC, VFib, like ventricular tachycardia. Her rhythm was the last rhythm that usually a person has before they die. And she was getting drips, she was being paced, everything that we could do, we were doing at the time. Of course, with all of that, she was still full code. And even though her condition was terminal and she was extremely ill, she had moments of lucidity. She would just wake up, look at you, and start talking. I called the son, and he was living in Florida at the time. I told him that unfortunately his mom was dying. And he confessed to me that he didn't have the money to fly. So he decided that he was going to drive 14 hours straight to New York. At some point, between codes, because that patient will code again and again, she woke up and she realized that she was dying. The way that she looked at me just changed. Between midnight and 5 a.m., she shared with me her fondest memories. She will talk to me if I were her closest friend, her closest confidant, as if I knew all her family and friends. I left that morning at 9 a.m. I was hoping that she would hang on until her son arrived. But she died that afternoon, an hour before he got there. I had to comfort myself knowing that even though I could not save her from the mighty dead, I gave her someone to talk to in her last hours. My third story is also about things that I could not change. I was in New York in COVID ICU from March to April 2020, and we faced death every single day. COVID ICU was something completely out of this world. The atmosphere was full of fear and uncertainty. I spent every day, the few first moments of my day, trying to motivate my nurses, my respiratory therapists to carry on the work. It was worse than the worst nightmare. In that ICU, I had a patient, she was 80, she was doing fine. She was holding her own on high flow for a week. I was happy to see her that way. I come on Monday and it seemed like something has changed. She was breathing fast. She was working really hard. She could barely talk. I sit next to her and start explaining that I'm worried that she's getting sicker. That I'm worried that she might not make it if we didn't connect her to the brain machine and intubate. She looked at me with a smile and says, "Doctor, so you're telling me that intubation might be my only chance? And even that is gambling with life?" I tell her yes. She says, "Doctor, I will gamble with my life and please intubate me if you need to do so." Even with intubation, her kidneys failed. She went into shock. She gambled with her life. She fought for a week, and I fought along with her. It hurt so much that I couldn't do more, that we did not have more to offer her. One day I cried so much because I knew I couldn't save her. I knew I couldn't save everyone. These stories stay with me, and I have come to understand and find comfort knowing that we help people as much as we can. And sometimes the help that we provide is honoring their desires to battle disease just a little longer, to share their memories just one last time. I see my interactions with the patients as profound, sacred, and human. Practicing medicine is more than providing a service. If you're caring for a patient, you have to know you're more than just a provider of a service. We are being participants in our patient's birth, life, and our patient's death. I hope we can all remember to keep alive our hopes, be humble in our defeats, and remember that sometimes to listen and to be present is the only thing that we can do for our patients. And perhaps we have to remember that it's the only thing that we can do for ourselves in that moment. That we are sharing that sacred connection. Thank you.
Dr. Flintons, that was great. Thank you. We really feel your compassion there. Next up is Dr. R in the room. She is also a defending Story Slam champion. PGY2 Internal Medicine, Dr. Katya R. And her story is untitled. She can title it for you.
Alright guys, I just finished this, so it's untitled. And I'm also gonna wear a mask because I'm scared of it. Okay. There's a bag of Skittles sitting in the afternoon light that streams through the big bay windows in my apartment. Often I find myself shifting them around lovingly, absent-minded, careful not to let them melt or spend too much time in the shade. I found them in my backpack on a day where everything went wrong famously. One of those days that feels like someone up there is playing a game, roll the dice. A snoozed alarm, cold coffee, 7 a.m. code blue. It's so early for death. Dr. R, we regret to inform you that your patient will not be listed for a lung transplant. Please tell his wife. Your patient is crashing at 11 a.m. This next admit is yours. This late admit is yours. Your patient is crashing at 5 p.m. Those plans that you made are not going to happen. That bike ride you needed is not going to happen. That break that you asked for is not going to happen. Miss the elevator. In the flurry of bags and clocks and racing the clock, my favorite coffee mug slips from my hands to the sidewalk and it shatters. Every shard is a bargain with a tear, every piece a tiny shred of willpower. I'm inside by the time it all crashes over me. The ache in my hips, the cut blooming on my fingertip, the death that quietly stalks in the shadows of life by the minute. That I need to be better about calling my mom. That at some point I stopped bargaining with my tear ducts. In my tragedy rage, I start blindly pulling things out of my backpack. Goggles, water bottle, papers, respirator, undignified bits of a pandemic doctor's day. I keep digging. I feel a crinkle and freeze. It's Skittles. The bright red bag takes me back in an instant to the only lonely moment we ever shared in a hospital room perpetually filled with warrior women, to Shirley. She had come in with back pain or some other quotidian complaint my mom has every day, and she was well. She loved feeding a deer named Mama, playing with her grandkids and walking through the woods behind her house, where she got bit by a tick and came our way. We talked about family, about beating this thing, and how it was all bullshit. She'd never seen so many doctors in her whole entire life, but here we were, and she was all right, just getting tired from the fight of it all. Each day I checked in, I met a new member of her herd, a tribe of sisters, a daughter, a testament to women looking after each other, to immutable strength. Peering in on the relentless brutality of unconditional love, I wondered when she would be able to leave. One more bone marrow biopsy, one more scan, one more week. She didn't look like a woman dying from cancer until she did, all at once, exhausted headscarf in the dim light, the brutal tide of unconditional love rising. through the crossed arms, solid Greek column scowl of her sisters, the shrewd, wiry poise of her only daughter, like her, consumed, yet fearless. I knew she was going to die before any of her tried, but not before she did. The morning light, the stillness between our eyes was new from the day before, when I had grabbed a bag of Skittles from her oldest sister in exchange for a joke, and well wishes for a clean marrow. Tomorrow will be the day we'll know for sure. I practiced in the hallway. Matter-of-fact phrases straight to the point. I'm so sorry your cancer is back and we have nothing more to offer. I'm so sorry you were so brave, but your cancer was smarter than us all. I'm so sorry. You took it well. You told me you were done with the shit. You asked me to let you go home. I wish I had apologized for more. I'm so sorry for not taking your hand in that deafening quiet, for trading tragedy for a bag of Skittles and pictures of deer, for leaving and staying in our liminal space for that moment, the look on your daughter's face, and then completely and fully unraveling. I got an email after you died about the rest of your life, how you were at home in the woods with your deer and your dogs and your tireless love. On the day that I shattered my favorite mug and worked too late and somehow not hard enough, on the day that I kept digging and found a bag of Skittles to absentmindedly shift around in the sun. My advice tonight is not mine, but Shirley's. Sometimes you need to know when to call it. There will be a time when you have had enough, and when you do, trust the beauty in the people you meet and breathe deep. Know that you are the strength of the hands that reach for you when you call and give them your entire heart. And that warrior narrative that hangs around cancer's neck like a padlock, weight of eternity, a key reserved for only a few, promised to many, I'll undo it. I won't let them sell you short. Because Genevieve, Ellie, Ryan, Janet, Patty, Shirley, that white flag never flies here, and there are no battles to be won or lost, only peace.
You're all so powerful, so amazing. Thank you, Dr. R. I could call her Katya, but I love to call her Dr. R because that's what she is. Next up, eighth, another champion, Miranda Haslam. Dr. Haslam is a PGY Cooper surgery, and her story is caring too much. Welcome, Miranda.
You just care too much about this. It was another day in the middle of intern year when I burst into the call room expressing my frustration about some aspect of patient care. Maybe it was a medication my patient needed but couldn't actually get because of a lack of insurance. A patient experiencing homelessness with no good options for discharge. A patient scheduled to undergo surgery despite the fact that it seemed unlikely to change the ultimate course of their disease. It was not uncommon for my co-interns to have to listen to me bemoan these and many other issues with our healthcare system. Your problem is that you care too much, they attempted to console me. You just need to care less. As a surgical resident, I'm well aware that the reputation of my specialty in the hospital is not of caring too much. The stereotypical surgeon is sharp like the blade of their scalpel, cool like the surgical steel of the operating room. And as a medical student, I struggled to decide what specialty I wanted to apply to, delaying the decision until nearly the last minute. Once I decided, I knew surgery was the right choice, but I also knew that many people were surprised. They thought that I cared too much to be a surgeon. And throughout intern year, there were moments where my confidence wavered, where I wondered if I really belonged in surgery. Maybe I did care too much. These moments were generally few and far between, but the feelings culminated one night in the winter of my intern year. I had just finished sign-out, was gathering my belongings, ready to head home after another long day in the hospital, when I heard the page overhead. Code blue, 7th floor, room 732. Code blue, 7th floor, room 732. My heart sank as I dropped my bags and rushed towards the stairwell. My patient. She had been admitted a few days before, and a few days before that, and a few days before that as well. She presented with a potentially life-threatening complication from her injection drug use, one that required immediate surgical intervention, which was thankfully successful. As the intern on a busy surgical service, I wasn't involved in her operative care that day. I was, however, intimately involved in the seemingly hourly pages that ensued during her post-operative course. Once her immediate surgical needs were addressed, the rest of my team was less involved in her care, and I became her personal doctor. The first time she left the hospital, quote, against medical advice, She assured me that she would come back the next day to continue her care. So I wrote my phone number on her papers and told her to call me when she did, truly expecting to never hear from her again. Much to my surprise, the next day I received a call from an unknown number. It was my patient, letting me know that she was back and in the emergency department waiting room. She was visibly intoxicated, but she was alive, and she came back. She was readmitted to our service, and soon enough, the nursing pages began again. I knew her room number by heart because I had been called there so many times to address unmanaged pain, to assuage nurses' hesitancy about administering the high doses of opioids she required to manage her dependence, to try to facilitate her being able to stay in the hospital to continue receiving the care she so desperately needed. So when they called the room number overhead that night during the code blue, I didn't even have to check my list. I knew it was her. When I arrived at her room, she had already regained her pulse, having been administered the life-saving naloxone to reverse the opioid overdose that occurred when she used her own supply of drugs in the bathroom of her hospital room. The medical code team continued working to stabilize her breathing for her until she was adequately breathing on her own. And I returned to the intern call room, bursting through the doors yet again, this time in a rush to hide my welling tears. I cried again on the train ride home, overwhelmed by thinking about all the ways that we had failed her, the ways I felt like I had failed her. This would be easier if I didn't care so much. It would have been easier if I didn't care so much when the next day I stood at her bedside, where we had resuscitated her less than 24 hours before, holding the against medical advice discharge papers for her to sign yet again. This time, she apologized to me for leaving. If everyone treated me the way that you do, maybe I would be able to stay. I didn't want to care less. I didn't want to stop seeing the ways that our healthcare system fails patients. It may be cliche, but I fundamentally believe that caring too much makes me a better doctor, and yes, even a better surgeon. The author Jamie Torkowski wrote, "If you feel too much, there's still a place for you here." And while this isn't what he was writing about, I want to believe that it applies to surgery too. If you feel too much, if you care too much, there's still a place for us in surgery too. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haslam. Beautiful story. I know how much you care. We all do, and thank you for sharing that. I am going to go last here. I'm going to actually take off my hat because I think I'm going to, instead of wearing another hat, I'll just wear no hat. And I thought that after 9 other story slams, it was only appropriate that I put myself out here and try to tell a story also. So bear with me. It's really not about medicine, but it is about advice. So it may surprise those of you who know me to know that I was a cocky college kid. Not cocky in the traditional ways that you might think, but cocky as a college newspaper reporter and a college newspaper journalist. I worked for the Cavalier Daily at the University of Virginia, and I joined it my freshman year, and by my sophomore year of college, I was writing front page stories all the time. I was covering the big hot issues on campus. I was going to the state capitol to cover the governor, and I was very full of myself, and I was all that. And I was pretty well smitten with the profession of newspapers, and decided that I wanted a summer job that summer at one of the big newspapers in America. And you all remember newspapers, right? They're the things that were made in paper that arrived on your doorstep, right? And people read them and believed them. And that was so last century. Anyway, I decided I wanted to do this. And all of the big newspapers in America had offices in the National Press Building in Washington, D.C. And so I made copies of my favorite clips, a cover letter, a resume. I put it in 60 envelopes, and I went up to the National Press Building, and I dropped one off at every office: the Los Angeles Times, the Miami Herald, the Boston Globe, the Inquirer, Dallas Morning News. And very contented, I went back to Charlottesville and waited for the offers to roll in. And I got one reply. one reply. It was from a place I didn't even know existed or that I had applied to, the Air Force Times. Not exactly what I was hoping. And even though in story slams I say, we're not allowed to have props, I'm breaking the rules, I'm having a problem. I'm going to read you the letter I got, a little of it. Dear Mr. Vitez, I'm sorry, but we do not have a summer internship program. Our work is too specialized to make such part-time employment practical. I would like to give you a couple of suggestions, however, which may help if you intend to pursue other newspaper jobs. One is to write individual letters, not duplicated ones, to each prospective employer. The impression given by a, quote, canned letter is that you are not really interested in a specific paper, just blanketing the field. It gets worse. The second suggestion is that you copy read your basic letter closely. When you apply for a writing job, your letter of application necessarily becomes a sample of your wares. Frankly, the syntax in your second paragraph is a disaster. I never read, or for a decade, did not read the last paragraph. I was crushed. I was humiliated. I was broken. I was angry. It was a devastating thing to get. And I saved it. I said to myself, you know, he taught me some bitter lessons. I didn't know a lot of these things. You think those are obvious and you should know them, but I didn't. But I gained a lot of humility that day, and I decided, you know, I'm going to make it, and I'm going to show myself, show this man, and I saved the letter. So roll the clock forward 10 years, 11 years. I'm at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm a staff writer. I've been to Haiti to cover the elections. I've been to Graceland to cover Death Week. I've been I'm all over the country writing features and news stories, and I'm having a good career. And I saved this letter, I framed it, I put it on my desk. I decided it was time to write this man and thank him. And so he had retired to Mullet Lake, Michigan. I tracked him down. His name was Bruce D. Callender, and I wrote him. I made a copy of this letter, and I sent it to him. And I wrote, dear Mr. Callender, I just you sure don't remember me or remember writing this, but I wanted you to know that I wanted to thank you for sending it and taking the time to write it, because your advice was really meaningful to me, and it was a bitter pill to swallow at the time, but I became a journalist, and I'm at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I'm doing well. Thank you. I got a letter back. This was, again, the old days where people wrote letters, envelopes, stamps, all that. I got a letter back almost immediately. Thank you, he wrote. You have no idea. The minute I dropped it in the mailbox, I felt regret. Here I was taking an ambitious young journalist and no doubt turning him off to the profession, but it was a busy newsroom, and I, of course, lost your letter, your resume. I had no idea who you were or how to reach you, so I'm really glad that you told me it turned out well and that you're a journalist. And thank you for writing me. Congratulations. So roll the clock forward another 10 years. I win the Pulitzer Prize at the Philadelphia Inquirer. And the first letter I wrote was to the first editor I had who was so influential. But the second letter I wrote was to this man. I said, Dear Mr. Callender, who would have thought, can you imagine? And I sent him a copy of the series of stories that won the Pulitzer. And I guess this makes it a medical story, because the stories were about end-of-life care and all the changes that were going on in the mid-90s. Dr. Horkin was in full form. Oregon had passed its assisted suicide law, which was very controversial. The Supreme Court had just decided that you could not only refuse care, but you could withdraw care, and that was, hospitals and people didn't know what to do. So there was a lot going on, and hospice was brand new. So anyway, I wrote all these stories, and they were all narratives about people, ordinary, everyday people going through facing these situations. And I sent it to him with a letter, like, can you believe this? And thank you again. And again, I got a letter back right away. And he said, Dear Mr. Vitez, congratulations. Thank you for sending this to me. When you're old and retired like I am now, he said, what you will savor is not the recognition you won, but the work you did. Because it's the work that matters. And you did terrific work. And I just want to close by saying that, I'm now old and not quite retired, but he was right, It is really the work you do that matters, that you remember, that you savor, and the relationships you make. And the last thing I'll say is that you never know. Be open to where your mentors are going to come from and what advice is going to prove to be really valuable. So I'll put my hat back on. Thank you. All right, we are concluded. Here's the voting and the part that matters. Thank you all, storytellers, for sharing your stories. You have a program in front of you with 1 through 9. Naomi and I are not eligible. She's not eligible because she's the director of narrative medicine and feels you shouldn't vote for her, and I'm not eligible because I'm disqualified because I used the prop, and that's illegal. So choose among the other people there, just put the number down of the person that they told the best story or the story that resonated best with you. We have very small prizes for the winner, and the winners will go on to the Story Slam in spring. So vote and hang around, and thank you all very much for participating and coming. All right, you guys, thank you for hanging on and waiting and bearing it out. We have a tie for third place between the future Dr. Nia Williams and the current Dr. Daryl Fleitas. So both of you come down, and we have a little gift. Thank you very much. Thank you to do that. And I don't know, Daryl, we're good. Just come take a bow. It's all right.
Stay over here. We're gonna get a group shot here.
Yeah, the ones are just hang out a minute. We'll get a group shot.
Email. Yes.
Okay. Second place, close. A former champion, Miranda Haslam. Second place. Come on down. There you go, Miranda. There you go, Dr. Haslam.
Wonderful story.
And quite a gap between her two championships, but defending champ, well, not a defending champ, but a new champ, former champ, for her untitled story, Katya R. Dr. R. I know, and look at all the talent, and wonderful people, doctors and future doctors. Thank you. Yeah, everybody, that's it. Take some food with you if you can. I know there's some left, and thank you all for coming. Yeah, that's it. Thank you all.